So we're talking about this study, Falling Behind, addressing Wisconsin's workforce housing shortage. I guess how do you balance the rising housing costs when most people are not making enough money to afford these places?
Well, that becomes the big issue because, as you know, housing costs in Wisconsin and across the nation are accelerating far faster than people's incomes. So for families, they survive either by paying too much of their income on housing, and as we all know, housing is the biggest part of your budget. And if you're spending 30 or 50% of your income on housing, there's not a lot left for other necessary expenses. So families either spend too much on housing or they live far away from their jobs or from the communities where they want.
And what's causing this? I'm sure there's a lot of four-pronged approaches that you have in there, but I know I'm seeing less people are buying homes and therefore are just filling up these apartments.
Right, so we've got multiple things that are kind of all hitting at the same time, so it's kind of a perfect storm of a crisis. First of all is, as a state, and certainly in fast-growing counties like Dane County, Brown County, and Waukesha, we're just not building enough units to keep up with population. So there's just not enough units to go around, so that obviously drives up the price and makes it harder for people to buy or to rent. The second thing, of course, as you mentioned, is we have a large number of families who maybe were foreclosed or younger people who have high student loan debt, and they're just not able to afford the price of buying a house. And they see those prices keep going up, and so they're falling further behind because the rent is higher, so it's harder to save for a down payment, and the cost of housing becomes even higher. Part of what also is driving this is a national trend that construction costs are just accelerating really fast. So for example, in Wisconsin, in the last 3 years, housing prices have gone up about 18%, and rents are going up a lot faster than income. So everybody's getting squeezed, and particularly middle class and working class families are feeling the squeeze the most.
Now, of course, an easy solution would just build more housing, but is there enough space in these growing areas like you mentioned, Dane and Milwaukee County?
There's plenty of space to build more housing if we build more housing at higher densities and with smaller lot sizes. If you want a comparison, the city of Seattle is about the same size as the city of Madison, but Seattle has about 700,000 people, and the Madison central area has about 300,000 people. So there's plenty of room to build more housing. And actually, we talk about in the report that part of the big solution is to build more housing and to build a wider variety of housing, different sizes, different types, the types of housing that people would want.
And what does that look like? You say different sizes, different types.
So for example, we tend to have two main types of housing being built right now: the large single-family house on the big lot that's expensive, and then the multifamily rental unit, because that's really the only thing that developers can get approved. So when we talk about a wider variety of housing, we're talking about smaller housing on smaller lots. There's this idea of what's called the cottage clusters, or kind of small little houses lumped together, duplexes, townhouses, kind of smaller multifamily. There's really a wide range of what's called the missing middle of housing that we just don't build a lot of. And we used to, 50 or 70 years ago, build this type of housing, and so people had a wide range of choices that would meet their own preferences or their stage in the life cycle. We just don't have a lot of kind of entry-level, first-time homebuyer houses or even move-down housing for seniors.
How do you entice builders to build more homes?
So I think the issue is not enticing builders to build more homes, because I think builders and developers want to build homes. They see a market demand, and they're ready to meet the demand. The real struggle is that local governments, and particularly the neighbors who are near where the new houses would be built, are pretty resistant to new construction, or particularly if it's density or at smaller lot sizes than what's present. So I really do think the issue is incentivizing municipalities and cities to allow a wider range of construction to meet the needs that people want.
Now, this is not just a Wisconsin thing. This is across the nation, and other cities across the country have kind of zeroed in on local land use regulations as an answer to affordable housing. Is this something Wisconsin could look at?
Yes, so in the report we look at a number of states that have adopted a wide range of policies and solutions to try to address the housing shortage, and we recommend that Wisconsin could consider a number of them. For example, the state of Oregon just passed a law requiring every city to allow not just single-family homes, but to allow multifamily homes and what are called granny flats or accessory dwelling units, or to allow townhouses and duplexes. And then, of course, there's a city like Minneapolis, which has also changed its zoning to allow greater flexibility for developers to build smaller units infill into neighborhoods.
What are the consequences, long-term consequences, if there are not enough houses for people, and how will it impact communities?
So that's a great question. If we don't do anything, if we continue on business as usual, we'll continue to get squeezed. Families will pay more, but we also know from the data that there are a number of businesses in this state that can't recruit or retain workers if you can't find affordable housing for the families who would work there. So in the long term, our families will continue to get squeezed, or people will have to live further away, and that adds to traffic, or the jobs and people will leave to somewhere else.
When you look across the nation, what states are doing this right, or who's taking a fast approach that you're looking at?
So every state is responding to this crisis. It's really interesting. You're even seeing states like Utah, which we don't think of as particularly innovative, are addressing this by requiring all communities to allow for this kind of middle income housing and to kind of expedite development. Of course, this is Oregon is a leader in this, as is New Hampshire.
Now, you presented this report to lawmakers, but during that committee hearing, some of them expressed some of the concerns over the solutions because it would impact local control.
Right, and that becomes the big issue. And so local control is this double-edged sword. We say we like local control, except when it produces results that we tend to not like. So the lawmakers were concerned because if we require every city, for example, to allow multifamily housing, that's going to lead to potentially some backlash in communities that currently prohibit it. The other side of the coin is, if you're a growing city that has lots of jobs and lots of demand for housing, and you don't allow multifamily housing or smaller lot housing, then you're really foisting that burden on all of the neighboring communities. So local control is important, but if a local control means that you're outsourcing your housing supply or your needs to all the other communities and causing sprawl or traffic congestion or segregation, then there's a fair debate about whether that should be within local control.
What can we expect to see in the next year?
So we understand that there's legislators across the state who are hearing from their constituents that this is a big issue, and we're urging them to consider bold and innovative and flexible solutions. Of course, there won't be a one-size-fits-all package across the state, but hopefully we will see some movement on legislation across the state to encourage additional housing development, to allow for more flexibility, to provide financial resources for struggling communities and struggling homeowners. But a lot of the action will have to take place at the local level as you work with your city council or your village board to really encourage more housing development and more flexibility in development.
All right, Kurt, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.